Good morning, everybody. It is December 28th, 2020. I'll start by reading our vision statement. The Ashland Public Schools cultivates the academic and social emotional growth of each student through a supportive, collaborative, innovative, and challenging environment. Students will develop into self-motivated, resilient, lifelong learners who embrace their role as responsible contributors to a global community. This meeting is being recorded by WACA Cable TV. In our order of business this morning, it's the same as our usual every Friday morning meeting on the COVID status. We moved this to Monday so we could talk about the status after the holidays. Our open session call to order, opening procedures, agenda review and adoption, public comment, items of interest to the public. Administrative items will include COVID-19 update, phases, models of learning, status of athletics, and then we will adjourn. So I will take the roll call and ask you all just to agree that you're on board with this agenda this morning. And I'll start with you, Mark Terry.
Here and present.
Paul Kendall.
Present, yes.
Erin Williams.
Present, yes.
Kathy Bates.
Here and yes.
Excellent, thank you. And I will also ask whether there are any members of the public that would like to give comment this morning before we get started. This is the portion of our meeting for the public comment period. You can share what you want us to know for about 3 minutes, and we'll give someone else a turn, and then we will move on to the rest of the items on our agenda. So is there anybody here who would like to give comment this morning?
I would like to give comment, Monica Mahoney.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Go ahead.
So hi, thank you for taking the call. I apologize if I'm muffled. I'm at work and I have a mask on. My name is Monica Mahoney and I'm an infectious disease pharmacist and a parent of a first grader at Warren Elementary School. I'm speaking in support of sending our youngest children back to school. As a nation, we got to where we are but not following the science, and I'm afraid that Ashland now may also not be following the science. Studies have shown that children, particularly those younger than 17, do not transmit COVID-19. Other studies have shown that children younger than 10 do not transmit. Regardless of which study you choose, students who attend Warren are below this age. Additionally, Ashland's own data does not show that transmission occurring in Warren. The emails sent have reflected Mendez, middle, and high schools. Additionally, I'm concerned about students who require additional needs or services who may not receive the services they need in a virtual setting. Boston, a city which has had higher rates than Ashland, has been opening more schools and classrooms specifically for these students. So I urge the committee to consider sending back the students, particularly Warren, and particularly those who have additional needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Is there anyone else who would like to offer comment? Okay, seeing none, I will turn it over to you, Jim, for the update.
Great, thank you. And thank you for meeting early on a Monday morning where I know especially a lot of our admin team and folks are on vacation this week. And so thank you for taking the time to meet this morning to get our schedule squared away, when school resumes on January 4th. I will share the data in a second, but as always, I start this conversation with saying thank you to Ed and Audrey. And as we turn the corner into 2021, I hope they can have a few more peaceful weekends. In speaking to Ed last night, at least it's been a good couple of days, a better couple of days. I wouldn't say good, Ed, but better in terms of the last week or so with the amount of cases that are certainly flowing into Ashland, but also in the Commonwealth. So I'm going to share our screen with you. Let me see here that I typically share with the data. Can everyone see this okay? Okay, and it's been adjusted through data as of yesterday morning. Ed just sent it to me. There's more data that came in overnight. There were 2 more cases that could be added to this. Neither of them were school-related age kids, just so we're clear. So those 14-day cases could read 94, but they were not school-age students. As you can see, we adjusted our rate based on through yesterday, last night. We're at 33.36. We're still well above the per 100,000 rate in terms of the number of cases and the incident rate. But what I want to stress is this. I mean, you can certainly look at a number of things here. And we've talked a lot about opening schools or not opening schools based on personnel availability as well. And currently you can see at this point, because of the way we approached it, and I really appreciate, Monica, your comments with regard to Warren, et cetera, and our younger students and transmission. The one thing we've talked a lot about is making sure we have our educators and the adults in the buildings in order to actually open up schools. So it becomes a personnel issue. And when we're needing to quarantine adults because of close contacts within our schools, that plays a big part in this. As you can see, currently, we do not have any students or any educators in quarantine at this point in time, and we don't anticipate any moving forward to January 4th. Our cases, as you can see, have continued to decrease. Now, one could argue that there's a lot less testing that's occurring as well. You know, as you know, in Framingham, they shut down 2 sites and opened up 1, and that's by appointment only, where it was supposed to be a lot more cases, a lot more testing to be performed, but we haven't seen that come to fruition yet. Karen Spilka's office is working hard at opening another free site in Framingham for all residents of Ashland and surrounding towns. Framingham opened one on their own that only is testing Framingham residents. So understand that a lot of the testing is not occurring as well, or as much testing. So if we look at our cases, we have 77 open cases within the community. It's been on a steady decline. Currently, when we're looking at our quarantine students, what I want to make sure, and I put it in the context here, is that you know, we have right now 94 students who are quarantined. Of these 94, I think, again, put it in context, 2 of them are because of positive students. 65 are travel-related quarantines, so those who filled out our forms and who have said, hey, we're traveling over this time period, we understand the rules, and here's when we can return. We have a form set up. These are students and families that have chosen to travel who will not be able to return until their quarantine is up. And then we have 27 students who are quarantined at this point in time because household members are positive. So these students have been deemed close contacts. And what Audrey and I had this discussion yesterday, what we want to make sure everyone understands is most of these 27 and the 2 student positives, those students will be off from quarantine before January 4th, before school begins. So it's really the 65 student travel quarantines that will be out there, if you will, at this point in time. That doesn't mean over the next 6 or 7 days, we may get some students or community members, educators who could potentially test positive, right? And then that number would increase. But as of today, I wanted to give you the what it really looks like in terms of the numbers. As we move forward, you know, athletics is part of this discussion as well today. I want to say that, and Stephen is on here, if we begin on the 4th, on January 4th, and we say athletics is a go, Stephen, we have it 10 days, correct, of required practice time before any games could even occur?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so as you can see by the graph over here, I've adjusted this for the teams that we would play. It's different than what was in the fall, the way it's been split up. I will say I've been in contact with all superintendents from these schools and across the Tri-Valley League, and I know Stephen is constantly in contact as well, asking about what is happening in their districts with regard to athletics, meaning they've all opened up, and you know, are there concerns? Are there shutdowns already occurring? What does that look like? Do they feel comfortable moving forward after quarantine periods? Is there going to be consistency with regard to close contacts? So for instance, in basketball, if we're playing Holliston and we have a case on our team, whether it's a player or a coach or anyone, in some instances it was actually an athletic director who was at practices, then, what are we, are we shutting down and Holliston shutting down? And the answer is yes. That would be close contacts for all of us, and it would all of those players in both schools would quarantine. So this is the data, and I'll just cut to the chase. I believe it's in our best interest to open up schools on January 4th in the hybrid setting. And I believe that we can support our athletics at the same time because of the length of time before we play games. I believe that, and we'll come back to the screen if you want. I want to just see everybody. I believe that, one, the reason we should be back, or a number of reasons. One, we have a lot of students that need to be in schools. Lisa does a heck of a job, and her department does a heck of a job with our food insecure families. But it's still better for our kids to be in school to ensure that we're getting everyone that needs to be reached with regard to that food insecurity. I think we've talked about mental health components a lot. And I believe every time we get an opportunity to be in school, it's the right thing to be doing. Audrey and Ed, I've had conversations with, we do expect, and Dr. Fauci and the governor and everyone's talking a lot about surges, right? And the next set of surges. Well, there's going to be continual surges throughout, I think, with regard to Christmas, New Year's, February break, April break, Martin Luther King weekend, or what. There's going to be opportunities, but what we've done here is we've consistently looked at this on a week-to-week basis, or made decisions, in the heat of the moment, if you will, if the numbers say and dictate we don't have staffing, or that we have to close down a couple rooms. We've done that consistently. And I think as we progress, that's the model that I suggest we continue with, and go from there. Athletics, to me, is an important component from the social emotional well-being. We can sit here and have debate on, well, why shouldn't we be opening up for all these other activities? Well, and I get that that's a conversation across the Commonwealth. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation, but I also believe that we can do some things within our athletic program and mitigate some things that to reduce the risk of transmission. I also think that January 4th, the week of January 4th, isn't when we're going to see the increased potential numbers. It's probably going to be a couple weeks after that, based on what we saw after Thanksgiving. Audrey, I think, we've caught up for the most part. Is that true in terms of where we are? I think there was a conversation with our medical professionals a couple weeks ago that it was becoming, quite a challenge to track everyone, to identify folks, and that plays a part as well. So that's where I am this morning on, what is it, the 28th of December, and I'll open it up for everyone here. But my recommendation is that we do go back into the hybrid model for all schools, and that we allow the athletics to begin. I want to be clear that if we go to remote setting, we've made it clear as a board, and you have, that athletics is off the table. So if we go remote, it's shut down because we don't feel it's safe to be in our schools. So that's where we are today.
So I will open it up to the board for questions or comments for discussion.
Lori, I guess I have a couple thoughts.
Sure.
So I agree with the approach that Jim's outlined in terms of sort of not getting ahead of ourselves. I think, I certainly was one thinking that when we went to full remote a few weeks ago, the question was sort of, does it make sense to acknowledge the reality of the human behavior patterns we've seen and assume that, as Jim outlined, probably going to see a spike in a couple of weeks, and did it make sense to stay out through MLK Day weekend as an example. But it also feels like, you know, and having the opportunity to reflect a little bit, it feels like that is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, and isn't relying on data. It's sort of assuming we know what's going to happen, and I'm more comfortable sort of going the route that Jim suggested, which is if it looks like it's safe to be in school, let's get them in school, and if we have to deal with something different in a couple of weeks, we can certainly do that. So that's sort of my first overarching thought. The second one, I think I want to make sure we're clear on the question of athletics, and I think that's a different question. But yeah, when we took the vote to say if we're going to be remote, there'd be no athletics either. You know, it struck me that was, I thought about it as a vote of the going remote as a district. And it strikes me that it really makes more sense for that to be the high school, because that's the only place athletics is occurring. And I don't know that we need to revisit that. It just was sort of an open question in my mind, such that if we have a circumstance, say 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, where the high school needs to be remote because we need to conduct contact tracing based on contacts, I would assume, based on our prior vote, that we go to remote. But I guess I want to make sure in this conversation that we get there, and I know what we're going to do. And then the third point, so this, I don't want to cause a repeat of the conversation we had at the meeting when we went remote, because I wasn't able to come in until late into the meeting. That was the one I had a work obligation, came in late. But my understanding at the time was the recommendation was that we not participate in athletics. And so I partially because I wasn't a part of that conversation, but also because I think it's important for us to hear the recommendation. But my understanding is the recommendation was don't go forward with athletics. That was based in part on our medical professionals giving us that recommendation. And so I want to have an understanding as to why the thinking is different now. Is it just that our case numbers have leveled off, or is there something different that we're seeing that we should be considering? So that's my question on athletics when we get there.
Does anybody want to respond to that, or do we want to take all the comments first and then?
I mean, I'm willing to respond, and maybe I'm wrong as well, Mark, in terms of how I interpreted that conversation. But I think we were not comfortable making the decision at that time.
Okay.
I think we were packaging it. We knew we were going remote, and so it took that conversation off from the table at that point in time.
So I guess then let me pose the question to our medical professionals. Are you comfortable with us going to athletics, assuming we come back in some hybrid model? Are we comfortable being in athletics from a medical professional's perspective?
Yeah, at this point, yes. Because at this point, we have not seen, from in controlled athletics, we've not seen any spread.
I would agree at this point.
And I want to be clear, Mark, and I think you've made the point. It's a fluid situation, right? And I certainly agree. I don't mean to say if we shut down, the Mendez School for a particular reason, that should impact the high school and athletics. I think every building and every decision we've made thus far has been localized to that specific facility, which is what we should continue to do.
I think the question of the differentiation in my mind, Jim, was do we need to be remote full district or just remote the high school to impact athletics? Yeah. And I don't think not sure we've had a situation like that. Maybe we did. And earlier we had a 1 week remote period at the high school. I don't know what happened with athletics then.
We were not in athletics when we shut down. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to give my perspective on where we landed on our conversation around athletics, it wasn't we still hadn't finished that conversation, right? So I think we need to finish that today if we're going to make a decision, but I think it's a different decision than remote to hybrid. It's not one, they're not coupled. They're coupled certainly if we weren't hybrid, then we weren't doing athletics. We were still, for lack of better terminology, kicking the can. That's what we did last time is there's no point in going further in the discussion at that point because we knew we were going to be remote for a few weeks. I'm not saying we should not do athletics, but from what I gathered, myself and others had questions, particularly around basketball and around the idea of, okay, if we're saying this activity is okay, what other activities are we saying aren't okay that we should revisit? Because what's more important about sports than these other activities that might be very important to kids, right? So that's just my recollection of where we landed. We were essentially kicking the can down the road until we had the opportunity to go back to hybrid, which would then bring athletics back into play. Is that where the others thought we were as well? That's where I understood us to be.
Yeah, I think I think you've summed it up. That's where we kind of landed.
All right. Just my thoughts on the hybrid. So I think we've all valued making sure we get every single in-person day for students that we can. So I'm in support of what you outlined, Jim. A couple questions though. And I'm glad you brought up the testing because that to me is a little bit of a wild card, and I'd like to hear what Ed and Audrey think about it. Positivity rate has always been a number, and I've mentioned it multiple times, but by itself doesn't mean a lot. But if it's too high, we can't trust our other numbers, right? And for me, at least, our decisions always come down to can we staff the buildings, and can we have confidence that we've completed the contact tracing and are preventing the right number of people that are positive from entering our buildings, right? We've shut down the high school because, hey, we knew we had a cluster. We weren't able to finish the contact tracing, so we weren't able to make sure we quarantined everybody that we were supposed to. If we aren't testing enough, and I don't know what enough means, what it is, then don't we fall into that same bucket of, not that the cluster we had in known cases that we hadn't finished contact tracing, but it goes to the confidence of that we're doing enough to make sure that we that we've quarantined the right people before they come into the building. And so just want to get your feel on, with the fall off, and I like I said, I appreciate you bringing it up, Jim, because that free site, when they switched to appointment only, the thing you hear all over the place is now you hear people asking, where can I get tested? Where can I get tested? Because they don't have any appointments. They don't have any appointments. And so it makes me skeptical of our other numbers and whether we're, confident, how confident we can be in the other things we're doing. So that's my concern there. And I'm curious what Ed and Audrey think about that. I know it's not something we can put a number on or something like that, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, a lot of the doctor's offices are now doing it. You have a lot of these urgent cares that are now testing. One of the things that Audrey and I struggle with is that some of these labs, they're not uploading their data every day. They'll be doing it in batches. So, for example, you could have somebody maybe that tested last Wednesday, and I may get the result today, opposed to other sites that upload every single day. And unfortunately, DPH hasn't, mandated that these testing facilities upload their data every day. So we've seen that where we've seen all of a sudden, we'll get a group of positives from one testing facility, and and now we're trying to play catch up on it. And that's why I think it's important that every day we're giving the data to Jim, Audrey, and I, so that way we're right on top of it.
One thing, Paul, I would say as well is that if you go back in time and review the number of tests in Ashland, since, I think the beginning of December anyway, so the last 4 weeks, we're averaging between 2,300 and 2,500 tests a week in the community. So that's been pretty consistent even before it was shut down in Framingham. That's not to say we shouldn't be having more tests occur. I'm just saying that those numbers have been pretty consistent with what the community is seeing in terms of number of tests.
So you're saying that the number of tests of Ashland residents hasn't gone down?
Correct. That is correct. Yep.
And that's good. The challenge is, as the incident rate goes up, the number of tests have to go up. Otherwise, our positivity rates to the point where it says we're missing people.
Right. No, yeah. So our numbers have actually risen in terms of total tests in Ashland. Yes.
So that all of what you're discussing, and I appreciate, Paul, you bringing it up, is what's been on my mind. And just from a personal experience, non-COVID related, but not being able to get a hold of a doctor on Christmas Eve for my father, and then going through Christmas Day and then 2 weekend days, how many people are you having today that are reaching out to the doctor for the first time, getting a test maybe today, where the town's not going to have the results until Thursday? And that's my biggest fear, is that right now we're in a little bit of a vacuum making the decision. And I guess, Jim, are we having the same call on Friday, or is this going to be it?
No, this is it, because we need to let families know. We need to the reason we chose today was because there's a time lag, right? We need to allow families and teachers and educators and everyone to understand this is what we're doing if we're doing it.
Would there be a number where, like, if what we voted on today was like, yes, we open, with a caveat that if we see number X with the data that's released on Thursday, we would have to pivot? Because that's what I'm sort of looking at, is where I want to be able to give the families the biggest heads up as possible, and the teachers. But at the same time, if we have a bunch of data that comes in on Thursday that tells us otherwise, that we're already starting to see, and the weekly incidence graph, like you see it a week and a half to 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. We had at least 3 days, 2 to 3 days before Christmas, right? Versus a half day before Thanksgiving. I don't want to set us up for failure, I guess is.
Yeah, and nor do I. But again, I'll go back to where I started the conversation with regard to personnel and being able to have personnel within our buildings to open up school. I think we're in a position where we can do that. Part of the reason we went to remote was because we had to quarantine, as you know, 70 staff, or 40 plus to 70, depending upon the day, right? So.
Aaron, I guess to my way of thinking, at least, that it does feel like as time has gone on, I'm focusing mostly, or in my own mind, I've been focusing mostly on the staff issue, because that allows us to keep operating. It allows us to have kids come in. And while we've had a lot of quarantines, the reality is most of those are being quarantined because they're close contacts, not because they're positives. For each positive, we have a multiple of other quarantines. And so, the way I think about this is, if we have the staff, we can open. We have to worry about how do we keep kids who are positive out, or kids who are close contacts. We need to keep those kids, need to stay home. And the same is true of our staff. If the staff are exposed to somebody, they need to stay home. And I think we've struggled as a community. We've struggled for cooperation with that at times. Sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate. I think the best thing we can do at this point is to be communicating to the community at large where we are right now. And obviously, Jim, you're responsible for communicating to staff, but you know, I would hope that staff would appreciate that whatever they did at Christmas, let's not create more of a situation by doing something at New Year's, which, you know, quite frankly, is typically I would think be the place where I'd have greater concerns about risk than Christmas, just because you tend to have more people gathering for parties and things like that. I don't know what's going to happen, you know, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it, is if we have the staff, that allows us to open. If we have a certain positivity rate in the community, a certain case number in the community, I don't feel like I've got to the point yet of saying, well, if we're over 50 cases per 100,000 or whatever it is, that there's sort of, well, that's too much and we should go remote. For whatever it's worth, that's just the way I'm thinking about it.
I think the one of the points Aaron made, I think, is a good one, is more around the risk we have of being in the situation that we had went remote at the high school for that week, right? And that we have this uptick, and I think, Mark, where the numbers kind of indirectly might influence it is sheer volume, right? We have a small group of individuals that have to do a boatload of contact tracing work, and that volume means that they might be over capacity and not be able to finish that contact tracing. We might be right in the same boat we were that week. And I think, I don't know, we don't need to meet for that. That's a call Jim can make on his own, saying, hey, we can't open the middle school or, you know, one of these schools because we know there's a cluster and there's still contact tracing, and therefore they can't open on the 4th. And that's always in play, right? You know, Ed and Audrey can always tell Jim that, hey, listen, you know, we're tracking down close contacts for 34 people, right? And you know, I think that's a legitimate risk as we have a spike, because that spike, you know, it's a spike. It's not gradual, and therefore, depending on when that hits and the amount of time the COVID task force is given to contact trace, might not be sufficient. So I think that is a real risk.
And if that's how we play it, like, I'm fine with that, of knowing that we could get to Thursday, Friday, and then all of a sudden we have too many to do contract tracing for, and that might be the way to handle it, rather than some arbitrary metric that we come up with, like just letting Ed, Audrey, and Jim make the decision. I guess I'm just worried because, and I know that the pharmacist who spoke at the beginning said that there's studies of transmission not happening in those age groups. Like, we know it's happened in our schools. We have irrefutable proof it's happened, and that took out an entire admin team. And so, or that, not that one, it took out other teachers with positives, but the admin team. And if you lose an admin team, you lose a school. So that's where I'm just, the stop-start, I think, is sometimes just as difficult as not being in the building. And just cautious of trying to create some sort of consistency with our leadership in how we open again.
No, Aaron, that's a good point. I mean, it's a challenge, right? The start-stop to me is not ideal, but I also understand and recognize the fact that a lot of our students need to be are not in great situations at home to begin with as well, right? I mean, it's sort of, I've had these conversations with Kathy, I've had them with Jen Cutler, I've had them with our counseling staff, and I don't want to make the assumption that all of our students are benefiting from staying home either, in terms of being remote. Not everyone has a great family life to be there, to be at home. And we've got to think about that as well. I mean, I think it's really important we got a lot of people on here today who aren't normally here, which is great on a Monday morning at 7:30, but it's complex. It's not as simple as just saying, there are X number of cases in a certain building, and so shut it down, or there aren't cases, so keep it open. There are complexities that exist with regard to our staffing, having Audrey and her staff having to contact trace and make those calls. And, you know, are adults in our buildings who may be exposed unknowingly as well, and then they become close contacts. And so every decision that we've made is very well thought out. Doesn't always appear that way, but there's so much work that's going on in the background. Hours upon hours of discussion with Ed, Audrey, DPH, epidemiologists, and the Department of Ed before decisions are made. And that's why we've been we haven't typically shut down an entire district. We've gone building by building based on the data that exists. And I like that approach a lot, because you can have, I called Ed last night. I say, hey, there's a age, school age kid. Yep, they don't go to Ashland, or they're not part of the system, or those are conversations we're having daily. So why would we consider, closing it down if that's the case? So.
Yeah, and one more thing too, everybody, one of the things that we are unique about compared to any other district too, I just want to point this out, is that we're able to get our staff back because they're not sitting in line at a testing station.
That's right.
We're doing it in-house, which is saving hours upon hours, if not days, to get these people back to work.
And are we doing a massive testing of the staff this week before we come back?
No.
Okay.
No, we're investigating it still. We don't have a price. And, the last time we did it, it was free. It was a donation through the company. But we're still waiting on the pricing, Aaron, in order to do that. So.
But what you have, that's for our symptomatic individuals.
Yeah, or our close contacts.
Close contact.
Okay. Okay.
And you still have enough testing for that, Ed?
I do.
To be clear, that's town staff. That's not
Correct.
We're not doing students. We're not doing other family members, right?
Correct.
And that's why, Mark, that's a great point. And that's why it's critically important when the message that will go out today, again, we want families to stay home. We want students to stay home if they're not well. Don't send your kid to school if they've got symptoms. That is what potentially could close and move back to a remote setting, is that students or adults are coming into our schools with symptoms and spreading. And I know it sounds simple, but it's not being adhered to on a regular basis. And that's what scares me more than anything, is that, we're putting our trust and faith in the community to do the right thing, so our schools can stay at least in the hybrid model. I think once they're here, our procedures have been wonderful. And in the process we're taking within the school, it's what we're doing outside. And again, I want to repeat, it's not about what kids are doing or families specifically. It's a whole community of all of us that making sure our safeguards are up continuously at this point in time. Not laying blame on any one area. I'm just saying we all have a responsibility so we can stay open, to stay in-person learning.
Jim, just one thought on that is that, I know people who are not going to follow the rules are not going to follow the rules, and no matter what kind of communication we put out, it's not going to make that much difference. But in this particular circumstance where we're coming out of two major holidays at which people gather, I'm wondering whether there could be some addition of suggestion, quite frankly, to people that if you haven't been socially distancing around the holidays, don't come back. There's no rule that says that, and I'm not sure we'll get a high degree of compliance, but it seems like it's a point worth making.
Audrey has made it clear to me that I need to make that point. She's smiling.
Thank you, Audrey.
She's made it quite clear that, listen, if you're going to congregate and you're not going to follow expectations, community expectations, don't come to school. So that will be part of the messaging, not only in written form, but in a verbal form.
So Jim and Stephen, I don't think Lori or Kathy have talked yet about, the hybrids things, but just out of curiosity, if we were today to say okay to athletics, when does that 10-day clock start? So when would the first competition be?
So currently our first competition is not until the 19th. So I've already moved what would have been our first week to the end of the season, just in case this is what happened. So we would have actually more than the 10 days that are required before a competition can begin.
Okay.
The teams haven't even been selected in some cases, right, Stephen?
Right.
Big
Yeah.
tryouts.
So that's,
They've done
yeah, we have nothing. They haven't done anything, which is why, that 10 days to do tryouts and get teams to practice and everything before any sort of competition. We have not done anything.
So can I suggest we kind of wrap up the conversation about remote versus hybrid, and then maybe move into athletics separately? In there.
Yeah, sure, Mark. I just wanted to give Kathy a chance to weigh in
Yep.
if you wanted to, Kathy, and I'll share my thoughts.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously glad we had this meeting this morning. Before the break, I wasn't sure we should just outright go to full remote until after Martin Luther King holiday. So I'm comfortable with Jim's recommendation, and Audrey and Ed, and the numbers are looking there. I'm comfortable with, there's 2 students positive, 65 are the travel quarantine, and others, I'm comfortable with those numbers. So I do think it is in the best interest of our students to have them in the building. So I'm comfortable with his recommendation on that.
Thanks, Kathy. And, and I too am willing to support that for today, given what we're looking at right now, this snapshot balanced against all the things that we're concerned about, and knowing that obviously it's better to have the students as much in person as not. So I feel like today that's the right call, also based on our willingness this whole time to break the details down as carefully as we can and look at what's right in front of us to help us make the next best decision. But that does tend to result in some of the back and forth that maybe we're concerned about, or some buildings closing and others not closing, which is also, I think, been the right approach, but we understand maybe the chaos that it can cause for some people. I guess the only thing I want to point out, without repeating what my colleagues have said, and I've agreed with all of the comments, is that I just feel that the situation continues to be extremely precarious. And it's in no way, for me, kind of the beginning of the end where, we're back and then we hope to get more back and more back. I'm feeling like this is a very temporary, like we can do this right now. And there are good reasons to do that. But it could be just a matter of a few days when we're having a completely different conversation. And I really just want the community to be very well aware of that, because some of the correspondence that we get might be strongly worded and saying things like, you lied to us, you told us we were back, but now we're out, or people who are nervous to come back if they're not sure that we can guarantee the safety. And so I just want to be clear that this makes sense to me right now, but I'm not entirely confident that it will be, the right choice in a few weeks or a week or two when we get more information about what happened with the holiday. And if that's the case, to your point earlier then, Jim, then we do need to talk about, again, if we now have a kind of a second example of what happens after some time off, that just a conscious conversation about whether we're continuing to be comfortable with the back and forth, or whether a longer term break is needed when we know what we're coming back to. So, so having said that, I'm really happy to support the recommendation today. I think it's the right thing to do for now, but with all those concerns verbalized. That's all.
Very well.
Westworth Authority, I share your concerns as well.
Erin?
Yep, very well said.
Oh, thanks. Anybody else before we move on to the athletic piece?
Do we need a motion to return to hybrid for January 4th? We
I
did take
believe
a,
we did because it's not a continuation, it's a change.
so I'll move that we return to a hybrid model.
I mean, we
Sorry, go,
can,
Paul.
but our vote was only to go remote through the end of the year, so, but I'm happy to do it, but I don't think we need one, but.
That's a good point too. So,
Why don't we take the motion just to avoid any ambiguity?
yep,
So I'll make a motion to return to a hybrid model effective January 4th.
I'll second it.
Good. All in favor, Kathy,
Aye.
Erin,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and I for me as well. Thank you. And then moving into the discussion on athletics. Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add here? Has anything changed, or how are your discussions going with people in other communities? What are we looking at for the next few weeks?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, I think talking to the other athletic directors and allowing those other districts to have already start their winter sports and kind of see what has gone on. I can say that there have been some quarantines that have happened to, whole teams, but there hasn't been any transmission that's happened from player to player that I know of at this point. The presentation and sort of what I presented to everybody was a culmination of a lot of different things. And what makes me confident in us doing this is the process that the state has gone through to create specific sport modifications for each sport. So, the MIA going through that, it feels okay to me to go ahead and try this in the current state, and that is shared by all the athletic directors.
Thank you. Does anyone have any specific questions for Stephen?
Stephen,
concerns?
Stephen, can you talk a little bit about the circumstances of those quarantines, like how they, if you know, just how those team-wide quarantines have come to be, what precipitated them?
It's been all about close contact. So if somebody on a team was positive, if there was a positive case on the team, everybody has been quarantined. There was one incident where there was a scrimmage between two schools, and there was a positive case at one of the schools, and both of the schools quarantined their teams.
So there sounds like there's been an assumption that if you're competing, even if it's a scrimmage, but if you're competing against someone else, you're close contact.
Yes, that's correct.
I think that is an important factor. One of the things that I thought would be difficult to assess, and I'm thinking about sports like basketball and hockey where there's constant movement, is how do you know how long somebody's been close to somebody else, right? I mean, I don't know, unless somebody's keeping track every minute of who's guarding who and how far away they are and all that. There's probably an argument that you're not a close contact if you use the 15-minute standard. But I think that approach makes a lot of sense to me, which is if you're in the competition, there's a positive, then everybody gets treated as close contact.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. And then also we have to, the other part of the equation in the 15 minutes and 6 feet is regular breathing. Even though you have a mask on, it's
Right.
much heavier breathing.
Right.
For me, the athletics conversation, I mean, it is more intertwined with anything else that we are currently not doing, as a matter of equity, that if we feel that athletics is safe, and if what Stephen is telling us is true about all the sport accommodations and how each team quarantines after any positive. I don't have an issue with sports per se, but I do have an issue if sports is treated differently than other extracurriculars.
Yeah, Aaron, I share your thoughts on that. My thoughts on sports are, I think, quite complicated. I guess I feel like on one hand, I fully appreciate the value sports has to kids. And I've said this before, I have a kid who plays 3, probably would try out for basketball. So it's not, something that I'm not struggling with both as a parent as well as a committee member. And I know the value that has to how kids do in school as a whole. I'm trying to sort of set aside my own personal opinions, quite frankly, which are, it does seem a little bit like, are we really, or this is something we're really worried about doing, or should be committing to? And I question, quite frankly, the sport modifications to me, for the point you made before, Aaron, about masks and heavy breathing. It's hard for me to believe that really makes it safe. But I'm also trying not to pretend that I'm a medical professional and that I know better than other people, because I don't. So I'm relying upon the medical reviews that went on at the state level, and to hear from Ed and Audrey that they're comfortable supporting it. Certainly I'm not sure what the right thing to do is, but I'm going to follow what the medical professionals are saying is okay personally. In terms of the equity point, I agree with you. It certainly doesn't make sense that sports gets preferred standing to other extracurriculars, but I do think there's a difference in that. I suspect, and I don't know this, so I'm certainly interested in what Jim or Kelly might have to say on the point, that extracurriculars people can participate in those in different ways, right? You can't play basketball virtually. It's called video games. But if you're talking about Model UN or some other club, there's probably a lot that can be done virtually. And I think that's a reasonable distinction to make. But I share your concern. I think if we're going to let people participate in athletics, they certainly should be allowed to participate in other things. What form that takes is a different question, and I'm not sure we're really looking to get into the weeds of how Kelly administers her building and manages extracurriculars and how they meet and things like that. So, like I said, my thoughts on the issue are complicated. I think sometimes probably contradictory, but at this point, I'm prepared to support it because we've got medical professionals who know more than I do saying it's okay.
Yeah, no, and so I think maybe Steve and Jim, it's probably beneficial to level set our conversation because it's been a little while as well. So can you go over which sports we're talking about? I think I know, but just make sure everyone listening knows which sports we're talking about. And then Stephen, if you could go over, we've talked about some of the what if scenarios, what would happen if this happened or this happened. So maybe a brief kind of, update on that, if there's anything that's changed. I know at the time we had the conversations, we were kicking around several things like, exclusive participation as well, things like that. So if you could just kind of level set us on what exactly we're talking about and any updates on the what if scenarios that we had talked about previously.
Sure. So we're talking about boys and girls basketball, boys and girls ice hockey, gymnastics, and alpine skiing are the sports that would be offered this winter. And in terms of the what if scenarios, can you repeat that? I want to make sure that I can answer it.
We talked about a lot of them. I think you mentioned, hey, if there's a positive case here, what are we doing that is a bit different than we did in the fall, right? Where we're going to treat this because there's higher risk sports because of the current scenarios, that we were going to treat our reactions or protocols with these a little differently. Like, hey, everybody's a close contact or whatever the case is. Like, even that is a little, I don't think that was formalized last time of, hey, if we played Holliston and someone there was tested positive and it was, within the last however many days, then everybody on our team is close contact will be quarantined, right? I don't think we got into the weeds last time on those kind of things.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Paul. That is a difference from this winter season, is the close contact and the contact tracing. So in the fall, if there was a positive case, if you were potentially following the modifications and were outside, you could be not deemed a close contact per se. But in the winter season, with things being indoors, that has changed. So if there is a positive case, with no conversation, everybody on that team is a close contact and would have to quarantine.
And with that, are we doing a full quarantine regardless of testing at any particular point?
That's a good question. I think one that we have to, I'd like to hear what Ed and Audrey have to say about that. I don't want to put them on the spot, but I think we do need to have that conversation of what that looks like. Is it a full 14-day quarantine? Are we going with the recommendations from the CDC? Or, are we waiting for a negative test? But I don't know the answer to that question. I would defer to the medical experts on that one.
So, and Audrey, correct me if I'm wrong. So, there's different guidelines, but when it comes to the schools, we've been following, to stay consistent, anything school related, we've been following the 14-day guideline for quarantine.
And that's regardless of tests. So
Correct.
if they get a test at day 8,
Yeah.
and it's negative, that still doesn't matter.
Yeah. So what we've been doing is, there's different guidelines, obviously, but what we've done is, if somebody wants to get tested on day 5 or 6, they can obviously clear their quarantine as long as they're asymptomatic on that day 8 for normal activities. But in regards to school, we've been maintaining the 14 days. And the reason we've done that is that we have found a lot of people under the age of 20 tend to become symptomatic on day 10 or 11. So we've done that to be on the safe side.
We constantly we're looking at it, so it's something that we're willing to revisit if we have to after we see what the numbers look like mid-January.
I think it's important, Paul. Audrey and I, we have this discussion, I bet, every other day, and she's in constant contact with her nursing staff as well. And I would say their recommendation has been pretty consistent along the way for the 14 days. I would, correct me again, Audrey, if I'm wrong, but all of the staff, the nursing staff, has said this is what they prefer. And this is the model that we need to, they go back and forth trying to figure out what's best, obviously wanting kids to get back in school. But overall, this is the recommendation that comes from their entire group within all 5 schools.
Yeah, I think it's also important, and I don't think it would, I'm just guessing here, but I don't think it would probably change someone's decision. But I think we need to lay out these things because people need to know what they're risking, right? If it doesn't even need to be an Ashland kid, and guess what? You're out of school for the 2 weeks and miss potentially 4 in-person days, right? Like I said, just knowing a lot of the family, I think that's a risk they'll take, but I think it's something we need to also lay out there that, hey, you go into this knowing these things can happen, right? But,
some of the surrounding towns are doing it a little bit different because DESE just came out with the new guidelines, was it last week or a week and a half ago? So some of the different towns are doing variations of the recommendations. But our nursing staff and talking with Ed kind of feel like maybe this is not the time to change it up a little bit. Let's just keep what we're doing and just hopefully we don't get the surge that we're thinking we might get. And if it's not bad, then we'll really look at those guidelines and maybe ease them up a little bit. That's kind of our thought process.
Right. And, also please remember too, what we're doing is working when it comes right down to it.
Right.
I wanted to take a minute to echo Paul's point. I think making sure that when it comes to athletics, that our communications to families make clear what we are doing, and that if each family's gonna have to make a decision about whether they allow their kids to participate, if we allow it generally. And some people may say, okay, yeah, I'm fine with that risk, but they're not thinking about the risk of quarantine or how we're communicating about quarantine or what we're going to do with it. And if the result is going to be, using the example of playing Holliston, and a kid in Holliston's positive, then you're close contact, and the result of that is your kid's going to be out of in-school learning for 2 weeks. Families need to know that and take that into account when they decide whether to let their kids play or not. And I think that's a really important point that we need to make sure families understand when they sign up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
As Stephen certainly can relay that message as well, but within my email discussing whatever decisions are made today by the committee, I will certainly outline that as well, Mark.
That's good. That's a good point, guys. Thanks.
So, I brought up the equity thing before, and Aaron mentioned it. And I appreciate your point, Mark, because there are ones that can be virtual, but there's ones that we're doing virtual that's not the same, right? If we're allowing basketball, why aren't we allowing band to, live stream the concert, but have the kids there? These virtual concerts are not the same. Yes, you can do it. Well, you can do basketball virtually. Go shoot at a hoop and video. There's ways to do lots of things virtually, but it's not the same. Not being able to do drama in person. There's lots of activities that I do think I don't want to kick it down the road. If we're allowing basketball, and I had said this to Jim, in kind of in jest, but it's reality, right? If we're allowing this, why aren't we just allowing wrestling? Because by definition, wrestling can't be close contacts, right? Just because the length of the period. So, and I say that as kind of hyperbole because everybody would probably say that's kind of crazy. But if you look at it just in what it is, it's not crazy. So I think we do need that equity piece discussed and figured out better, because I have students who do band and they can't do the things they would normally do, but it's okay to do basketball. So I think we do need to, talk more about that equity piece, because I think we're doing things now that we wouldn't have done a few months ago, right? And so if we're readdressing it continually as a change of seasons with sports, let's make sure we're taking that lens and also applying it to the other activities that for those kids are just as important as sports for all the same reasons, right?
Yeah, I would agree, Paul. Similar to what Mark said, if Ed and Audrey are giving the thumbs up to do this, then I am not going to argue with them. I don't have that expertise, and it is complex, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but I'm willing to support their recommendation. But I share the concern, I think, first initially brought up by Aaron, and Paul just articulated it a little bit more. If we're not already doing this, and we don't need to do this here and go through every single activity, but taking the same principles that we're applying to allowing athletics to move forward and justifying that safety, if those same things, we should take those same things and apply them to everything else that we offer. And if it can be done virtually and that's good enough, then maybe that's preferable and it's safer. But to Paul's point, if there's something that can be done in person with the same principles applied that we're applying to athletics, then I don't really see any reason why we're not doing that. And maybe we are. I don't know what's happening. That's the point. This is more of an administrative thing, and I don't know what's going on in the building personally at all. But I would ask that if we're not already looking at that we take a deeper look at it for those reasons.
Yeah, I concur with that. So.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I do as well.
I don't think we can disagree with it, Lori. I certainly think that when guidance comes through from the Department of Ed and then the MIA with regard to their medical professionals making recommendations, we're basing our decisions within the school building based on guidance and guidelines from state organizations on both fronts, right? Whether it's the academic portion or theater or music versus athletics, they both have medical professionals that are weighing in and then providing the guidance. And that's sort of where we're landing. It's the medical professionals are saying, the original guidance that was published for, say, chorus couldn't be done indoors. That's, or musical theater. So that's coming from medical professionals on that the DESI's looking at, and they're approving it's kind of crazy, right? They're approving the medical professionals from the MIA saying you can have these sports. There's sort of inequitable decisions being made, certainly across all theaters, if you will. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate those challenges. I mean, it feels like a trial where everybody has their expert to support their position, and that's just the way it's going to be. But I guess as long as we're doing our best to, if we're signing on to certain principles, to try to make sure that we apply them across the board. That's all.
Yep.
And so, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, sorry, Mark, it was me. I was just going to say to that point, if it's recommendations and not something that has a consequence to not be followed, right? We're already doing that in the realm of our quarantining. Now we're being more conservative in that area, but we all know that sports in Massachusetts reigns supreme over anything else, and will always be treated with a level of a preferential treatment as far as who's addressing those first and trying to get that back. There's more money in it. The MIA is very powerful. Is there any consequence to us saying, okay, we understand what DESI's guidance is, but here's how our board feels, and we feel that, say, drama club, where, if you're masked and inside, how is that any different of a risk profile from basketball? And you can act 6 feet away. You can't play basketball 6 feet away. And so can we make decisions for the district that bring this equity piece probably a little more level than to where it is? And also with the thought of, you do have kids that are remote learners or homeschoolers that have the ability legally to participate in clubs and organizations that the school provides. And it might be a way to sort of, I know if there was more stuff offered for my family, that we would be participating and helping keep those bonds with the community that aren't currently there, given that my guys are home. And so, Jim, I guess I'm looking for, is there any consequence or slap on the wrist that we're going to get should we start making these decisions on our own?
I don't know. I don't believe so, but I can't definitively say yes or no, Aaron. So I'm only worried about the student learning time where there could be a slap on the wrist.
Right.
And that's
Yeah, is this
Different
something that
conversation,
we
yeah.
can look into for our next scheduled meeting? And knowing that I think we all kind of feel that way, that can we look into it? Like, I don't even know, does the theater group have the equivalent of the MIAA? That's looking into these things. So
can I say something, you guys? This is Kelly.
Sure.
Yes, please, Kelly.
Kelly.
I think I share a lot of the same concerns in terms of wanting to make sure opportunities are available for kids. And a lot of our clubs are functioning remotely. They are struggling to do some activities, and some of our clubs aren't currently running. But I'd be happy to collect some data on what I think. One thing I'm thinking about is the advisors and their ability and willingness to do in-person activities. So I'd like to collect that information. I don't know that there's, I think it depends on the club and whether or not there is a bigger organization overseeing what they do. Someone mentioned Model UN. They are doing everything virtually right now as a state organization. Make-A-Wish, we know where that's, where that is at right now. They're doing everything virtually. But there's certainly other clubs that would like to do some in-person things and have asked on individual bases.
I think that's a good point, Kelly. I think we have to start at the advisor level and the comfort level of the folks who are actually running those clubs and organizations.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kelly, for that. And I think, and I read too much into it, but I think it might also sound like the willingness to, if there isn't a governing body above providing guidelines, how comfortable those advisors are with coming up with their own protocols and different things. Is that kind of one of the things you were alluding to, that as part of it, and like, hey, if somebody's willing to do it, but they don't want to be the ones coming up with the rules, or and if that's the case, is it something that we can help them with?
No, I think we certainly could be following the guidelines that we follow during the school day in terms of in-person meetings and that type of thing, and activities. I mean, some of our advisors are remote themselves,
Yeah, so maybe, Kelly, I think it'd be very valuable just to figure out what is operating, because I don't think the five of us, at least I don't know all the ones that are operating in which capacity and which ones, the students are like, hey, this isn't good enough, right? Somebody said good enough before, right? It's like, what is good enough for the, we can check a box saying, hey, we can do this virtually and we're doing it. But if the kids aren't getting the value that they think they need to get out of it, then, be interesting to see where all those things lie and whether we're doing a good enough job for them.
I would like to have Mr. DiGirolamo come back with the same, especially in light that we're not having middle school sports. And so clubs and groups at the middle school level is really the only outlet to see how they're currently operating, what could we do to enhance them, and what level of interest or concern some of the advisors have.
And the same, we could do that, and our clubs now are running remotely, right? So exclusively right now. So, but I certainly get you that feedback from those advisors.
Thank you.
Yep.
I do think, to a point I think Aaron made earlier, I do think it makes sense to, if not to find out whether there are consequences from the state, which I suspect there probably aren't, but also to advocate for our kids. And if, DESE through the MIIA is going to bless sports with all sport modifications, it feels appropriate for us to be pushing back on them in terms of whatever guidance they've issued, to say, why would the same rules, same thought process not apply for drama, for band, etc. And I think give everybody the benefit of the doubt, which is, some of this guidance came out in the summer. We know a lot more now than we did then, but feels like, advocating for our kids and their opportunities, we ought to at least, pose that question to whomever's issuing guidance, and then, figure out whether or not there are consequences, and any way we can look at sort of medical professionals saying, yeah, it's fine, or whether we just apply our normal 6 feet apart kind of rules, and you can do, whatever you want to, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I guess my request, Jim, is if you can make some contact with the state and find out, from their perspective, whether there are any restrictions, but also to say, look, this is something that, since we're talking about the athletic issue, it is an issue of equity to kids, and why they sort of pose it as however you choose, but why the inequity between athletics and other activities.
Thanks, Mark. And this committee is not alone in those concerns. I know that they're thinking about this in a lot of other places, because it is a real issue. And again, I think just boiling it down to, it sounds like what this committee is saying is we are willing to support the athletic recommendation for today, but not in a way that it prioritizes athletics over all of the other things that also contribute to students' mental and physical well-being and otherwise. And as long as our administrators have the ability to look into how we're doing in those other areas, then we can be comfortable moving forward. Does that sum up how everybody's feeling about this?
Yes, that's
Yes,
great.
very well.
Yeah, so hey, Lori,
Yeah.
we did talk about other things like exclusive participation, right? And so I don't know if what the committee or Jim or Stephen think about that now, being a couple weeks later. Just we had talked about if students are participating in our athletic program, that they're not participating in some other outside program, and I don't know, we didn't land on where we wanted to be on that. I don't think at the time, but that was
Right, and
another
there were issues on
consideration.
spectators as well, Paul. I remember, I think, Stephen, you said that all the communities have somewhat different rules about that, and it was hard to get everybody on the same page. So I was a little concerned about that, just because, what's the point of doing it if you can't guarantee that it's being done across the board. But your thoughts, Stephen, on those concerns?
Sure. Well, when it comes to spectators, a lot of it, it's all really facility driven in the winter. So there's different size gyms, there's different size rinks. It's not a one size fit all like a field in the fall. So when we met as athletic directors, and then again with the principals, it was clear that there was different levels of, I guess, comfort, you could say, or the ability to have spectators. So my recommendation on the proposal was that we start with no spectators, and kind of go from there, see how it goes, with the ability to potentially change just like we did in the fall. But, if we're just starting this right now, my recommendation would be to start with no spectators.
And
It's
what about
typically
like
legalized.
participation on multiple teams? Like if students are on other teams that aren't enforcing these same kinds of safety standards, how can we manage that?
Well, I think that in theory, it sounds good. I think the hard part is policing it. How do we find out? How do we know? It just, the potential is kind of somebody turning into a whistleblower, so to speak, on somebody else, which is, whatever we need to do to keep people safe, we need to do. But I don't know what the right answer is there. I know, or as far as I know, there's no other communities that have added that in. Jim, I don't know if you, on the superintendent level, if you guys have talked about that, but I don't know of any other communities that are doing that. I know it would be a hard thing for us to police.
So the answer is no. There hasn't been any discussion at the superintendent level with regard to that. I'll just weigh in. I believe that we have every right within our purview to mandate that kids are playing. They're playing for the Ashland teams. Then that's our job is to mitigate risk, right? And by doing so and saying, hey, if you're going to play on our boys basketball team, then you're playing on the boys basketball team. Or if you're playing on the girls ice hockey team, you're not playing in these other club teams, where you're then bringing in opportunities for risk. And I don't, Stephen, I don't know where the MIA, bona fide team rule comes into play. Obviously it comes into play when you have to miss a practice or whatever. But I certainly think having our athletes, our student athletes, participate on Ashland teams only, it gives them the choice, right? If they can't adhere to that, then they shouldn't be playing on our teams.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, and I didn't mean to make it sound like I didn't. I just think I'm pointing out the challenge of that would be policing it. But I do agree that that we should and can do that.
The challenges are great no matter what we do, right? We don't know. We probably have. I've got 65 families that have committed to quarantining because of travel. Do I think there's probably 165 out there that are maybe? And we can't police that either. But when we find out someone traveled, we had this happen, I think, even at the middle school over the Thanksgiving break. We find out, we deal with it. That's what we have to do.
Right, and at least making the statement affirmatively,
Right.
it lists our expectations as well as giving us an opportunity to provide consequences if we do find out about it. But I certainly appreciate the challenge of, nobody wants to be a spy and trying to get to the bottom of it and figuring it out, but we all do want to play our part in being responsible. And let's remember, one of the biggest reasons why we are on the verge of allowing this to go forward is the very compelling argument that it's really important for the students' mental well-being, but that doesn't mean, you have to be on 3 teams.
Right.
Right.
Right? I mean, all the emails I've received is they want to play for their team, their high school.
Right.
I'm
I am
not
thinking
sure
there
they
could-
want to play for their club teams, and that's all well and good. But the argument I keep getting from families is, Jim, they want to play for their high school. They miss playing for their high school. Great. If we can make that happen, then that's where they should focus their attention.
So can I just, sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I was just going to there could be families out there that have already committed to these club teams that they've been on all year. So I'm just throwing that out there.
And
It might
maybe they should not play on the high school team because they are bringing an added element of risk to our students. And to our earlier conversation about being forthright with the community about what risk you might be exposing yourself to if you play sports, that's a piece of it.
Yeah, so I think in line with Kathy's comment, one of my concerns, I guess, is you can say play on one team, but there are teams that are off season, right? So club baseball is going on now. They won't have a real season and start playing against other teams until April or something like that. And there are probably club hockey teams that are started in August and will go to March that will overlap with other seasons or already did overlap with other seasons. And so it feels like it would be very difficult, not just the policing aspect of it, but I think there is something for people who wouldn't have known that when they signed up. And I'll be honest, I'm in that boat. My son plays a club baseball sport, and has for the last couple of months. He got on team and started practicing. He's gonna have to make a decision then about what he does with basketball and baseball and football for the school, 9th grade level. That seems like, and I don't mean it to be about my circumstances, but it's an example. I think there are a lot of places where people signed up for something else without knowing, and it may or may not have an impact. I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I certainly appreciate the fact that if we're trying to be safe, we're trying to minimize the number of people that they're in contact with. That makes sense. But I'm not sure that sort of saying, well, if you play on a club basketball team, you have to decide between that and ours. I'm not sure I come out on that one.
Yeah, so my thought on that is, Jim, tell me what you think. What we get all the time is social emotional well-being, all these other things, right? Well, if you're already playing on all these other teams, then don't use that as the reason that we need to do this, right? So the reason we're willing to look at this is the benefit that this would have for the students from a social, emotional, all the other reasons we have sports anyway, that we have a budget for sports and we spend the resources on it, right? And so if you're already playing all these other places, then that's not then you need to make that choice. And in an ideal world, I'd love for them to get the value of both, but they're getting that social, emotional, all the other things, that outlet for when sports are very important to them. They're getting that from the club team then, and they can make a choice of either or. And for me, it comes down to, and I've asked, probably irritated Steven several times when I've come up with the control piece, right? We allow this, and I asked him several times about when we go to another site, who's in control of making sure all the protocols are followed, right? And we start going out to club teams, and that's a very different dynamic. And for people that are having to make that choice, they have to make the choice. Everybody has to make some kind of sacrifice. But what we want to do is provide the opportunities for the ones that where this is their thing. Playing on the Ashland basketball team is going to help them social, emotionally, all the other reasons why we run the program. That's why we're having this conversation. If the majority of them fell into that camp, Mark, I would have a different outlook on basketball. I would say, let's not run it. If we're not providing that benefit, right, and they're getting that from some other place, then I probably would have a different stance on inviting that risk, because this is a high risk sport relative to what we were doing in the fall. So that's just my take on it. That, you know, it's very probably flippant way to say it, but that's a first world problem, right?
Yeah, I think, no, that's fair, Paul. I think it's yeah, like everything else. This is a complicated discussion because every student's different, right? And, you know, I think it's fair to say that a student who, for example, participates in basketball and that's that student's outlet, may also find a different outlet for a different interest that same student has in the drama club, right? It's not, everybody's not sort of just that one thing in terms of one activity is their outlet. And, you know, so I guess the concern I have is that the degree to which we're now kind of going the opposite direction of where we were before on athletics versus clubs, right? We're looking for some equity, and I certainly appreciate the point. None of us knows what is going on, how well rules are adhered to elsewhere in other programs, but I do think it's you know, it's entirely possible that different kids have different outlets that are athletic, and some are satisfied in part by club participation, and some are satisfied by participation at the school level. I get the point. It would be a hard restriction for me to support. That's just one vote that I have.
Well, and I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem that we've kind of, and it's not our fault, but where you had parents sign up for clubs, like Mark, you said, in the August, September timeframe, not knowing what school sports was going to look like, and just trying to provide something for their child, not knowing that it might be a deal breaker later down the line. And that also, if we are remote and sports from a school system is canceled, there are parents that are still going to want their kids to participate. I'm wondering, can we field teams and have enough student athletes if we were to exclude club sports? Because I have a feeling you might actually have some people choose the club over the town.
I mean, I do guess what's different now as opposed to the fall or whatever we have fall 2 and spring is everything else pretty much is outdoors, right? And this is the indoor season for everything that we're potentially offering, or we are offering. I've said my piece on the matter.
I mean, I guess I've already said some version of this, but, you know, and I appreciate you, Mark, sharing those details of how this can all play out and the challenges it might bring for students who, you know, get their comfort from multiple activities. But the whole reason why we're having this conversation, I mean, even the MIAA has, from what I recall from Stephen's presentation, they've characterized some of the sports that we are on the verge of offering as, you know, low, moderate, high risk. And some, especially on the higher risk areas, my vote to allow it to happen, because why would anybody engage in things that, you know, have these increased risk during a pandemic unless there was a really compelling reason? So for me, the compelling reason is the whole mental health piece. So the kid's not home, alone, distraught, not moving, not being with friends. And if there's already an opportunity to do that somewhere else, and we're then saying it's okay to engage in this activity that everybody is acknowledging is moderate or high risk, then why pile that on, I guess, is how I'm feeling about it. It kind of, it just waters down my reason for supporting the activity in the first place. And I do understand, that people are multi-layered and take comfort from different activities at the same time. But the basic reason for me supporting these activities going forward under these circumstances, which we've all acknowledged are very precarious, and in some cases can be dangerous for people, I'm only comfortable allowing it if there's a really compelling reason. And so if people already have access to other things, then the reason isn't as compelling for me. So my preference would be, if we're going to allow sports, to at least make the statement that the expectation is that you would not be participating in other sports that we have no control over how they're being regulated. At some point, we have to take a vote on this and wrap up this conversation.
Yeah, Lori, I think I land in that same boat, for the same reasons, right? If that's the overwhelming thing, and we're not able to field teams because people have committed to club teams, then I guess the need isn't there for us to, to do this, right?
Well, we're not having this conversation so we can field teams. We're having this conversation so we can make sure that the well-being of our students is being taken care of. So it's just a matter of where that's happening and what control we have over the safety aspect of it.
Right.
So my last thought on this topic is that I can see the difference between thinking about just your situation, Mark, right, with Matthew, whether it's basketball and he's on he's practicing indoor baseball throughout the winter months and he signed up for that. To me, I'm more thinking that if you're playing on a basketball team right now, you make the high school team, that you're not on a travel basketball team going to other towns and participating across the Commonwealth. It's different than saying, my kid's playing basketball and now he's going to go and throw the baseball and take hitting practice or whatever during the winter months as well. If they're participating and playing games and moving and traveling, that I have a different feeling about that because I think that opens up more of the risk. So the club hockey, you're playing on the Ashland hockey team. You're not playing on a club team traveling, during the hockey season. That was sort of how I was thinking about those things. Not the fact that, hey, I'm an athlete who plays 3 sports and I like to go and get individualized training from my club coach during winter months, even though I play basketball. But it's a challenge for sure.
But Jim, if this is risk-based, then why would there be any differentiation there? From that logic, I can play basketball on Ashland and play on a club hockey team, right? And those are both higher risks.
Sure.
The indoor baseball practice is a higher risk than baseball was in the fall where it was outdoor, right? So if it's all risk-based, I don't see the distinction in those things, right? If that's the reason we're doing, one of our concerns is mitigating risk, then the risk of any indoor sport activity that is not regulated by us is the risk. It's not a, hey, like I said, by that definition, we can play hockey for someone else and basketball for us or vice versa. And, if we're not concerned about that, then we shouldn't do the restriction because that's the same risk, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess.
Well, I think there's a difference between a skills and drills type of club set up right now and a travel team.
Right.
right? And I think, Mark, to your point, right? Matthew, and I think you said Coyotes, that's skills and drills. And that's all mostly town kids, maybe the couple from a different town, but it's skills and drills. It's not full on games going to, like, you know, there were some lacrosse leagues that went to New Hampshire and had full on tournaments in the fall. I feel like we could differentiate between skills and drills based leagues and actual travel teams.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful. I'm not. This really is a sort of broader question. I've used my circumstances, my sons, as an example. You know, I mean, right? Quite frankly, it's the Devils baseball team. They're kids from probably 3 or 4 kids from Ashland. The other 9 are from other towns. I mean, I will say they're doing a very good job in terms of the social distancing, the protocols, and they're only in practice. You know, they're hitting, they're fielding, they're pitching, that kind of thing. So you know, I think there's a difference, but we can't. I think the broader point that people are making, and I appreciate it, is that we don't have control over that, right? And that doesn't mean that if one program is adhering to rules, that all of them are. We just don't have any control over what others are doing. So, I mean, I think, you know, to me, it feels like we're at the point like let's deal with the issue of athletics, and if there are conditions we want to take separate votes on, because I certainly am supportive of athletics going forward. I think we ought to take that vote to move forward with Stephen's recommendations. And if there are other conditions that we want, just because there may be a split vote, maybe we take those up as separate votes, just for, you know, ease of understanding what we're voting on.
So, I agree with that, provided that they're not coupled for some members, right? You know, whether one of us says, hey, I will only support athletics if we have the condition, then we can't separate the votes, right? And I don't want to speak for anyone. I don't know that's the case, but.
Why doesn't somebody try with a motion first? I think everyone has said how they feel about it. And I think we're ready to try to make some decisions. But
if I may, Lori, one of the things that I think, you know, might be a differentiator for people, and I don't know where people's comfort level is I think Aaron did bring up, you know, a point in that there may be a distinction, and I don't know whether it would change people's support or lack of support for the condition around, you know, that the stipulation is you can't play for a competing, you know, somebody that actually has competitions of any sort, but that, you know, practices with a small group is okay. I don't know if that's difficult to articulate or whether, I just don't know. She brought it up, but I don't know that we had any conversation around it, so.
Well, why don't we, I'll make a motion to start, and my motion is to approve, I guess, moving forward with, correct me, the winter season. Is that what we're on, Stephen? Is that what we're calling this?
Yes.
Okay. Move forward with the athletic director's recommendation for athletics for the winter season.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Wait, Mark, are you saying that without stipulation, or?
Yeah, for now, just as presented by Stephen, and then I figured if there are going to be stipulations, they would be voted on separately afterwards.
Okay.
That's why I'm making the motion.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor? Mark, Terry?
Yes.
Kathy Bates? Paul Kendall?
I'm going to abstain. I'm not sure where I land on without stipulations.
Aaron Williams?
Crap. Sorry, I seconded it, Mark. Yeah.
No, I seconded it. Aaron.
Oh, okay. I take my second away. I'm going to abstain as well.
Yeah, and I'm not ready either. So I think let's try a motion with a stipulation in it. Does anybody, Paul, do you have a way to articulate how you're feeling?
I actually think I can do it somewhat eloquently.
Yeah,
so
go for it.
I move to commence the winter sports season with the expectation that our athletes are participating in Ashland or
a practice-only based club and not participating in a travel competitive based club.
We have a second for that?
Second. Mark, does it make sense to you? The way it's,
I understand what Erin's getting at. I'm
yeah.
a little concerned about the wording, but I don't think we
Yeah.
need to get into legislative history. I think we know what she's getting at.
Okay.
You want to try a different way to word it? How about a motion that allows athletics to go forward in Ashland with the understanding that athletes will not participate in other travel teams?
I would second that.
You say that again, Lori?
A motion that allows Ashland sports to go forward for this season with the understanding that athletes will not participate in other travel teams.
And so when we talk about that, I mean, are we
As long as
talking
we
about?
define travel team, I think. we're
Yeah,
fine.
that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
That's how we're defining that. So I mean, if travel team is travel team that's also playing competitively, which is I think where Erin was trying to go, playing competitively during the winter season. So we're talking about competitive hockey, competitive skiing, competitive gymnastics, competitive basketball.
Or wrestling,
and-
or other things that are outside of school that aren't, that we're not offering, but.
So I'm sorry, Paul, say that again.
Or anything else. Those are just the ones we're offering, but there's other ones we've punted that they could have clubs teams for as well.
Right. So if it's that broad, that it would be any team. So if you had travel, I don't know if there is such a thing, but travel football that you've been playing in since October, and you're going through this winter season, that would still be covered by the motion, Lori?
I mean, that would be something that I would support.
Okay. And even if they were not actually playing games right now, but it would be a team that you're participating in and maybe practices only at this point. And I'm just trying to understand what the scope of the motion is. So I'm not.
Yeah. I would just limit it to travel teams. I mean, we have no control of what they're doing or not doing or competing or not competing.
Right.
I'm assuming that everyone is in the same situation where they're going to be coming in and out of this sort of remote back to participation, so for me, it's just about, I guess, being in the program and not necessarily exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
Maybe the word has to be, maybe we need that word compete in there instead of saying traveling. You're not supposed to travel, but maybe the word needs to be competing.
Competing on a travel team. Paul?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to type up something.
So
maybe you can't be competing on another team. So the word, the operative word there is competing. So so you could be practicing drills and skills, but you're not competing in competitions. What'd you come up with, Paul?
Well, which then, just while Paul's finishing that, then it makes it almost equivalent to what we have with girls ice hockey, right? Except girls ice hockey is going to compete, but you have kids from Ashland with potentially kids from other towns practicing.
So,
and that, if we're allowing girls hockey, then that one should be relatively okay. We're just saying from a competition standpoint, we're limiting girls ice hockey to TVL large. And for anybody on club sports, we're saying no competition, which I think that from like a consistency standpoint holds water.
Can I just jump in? And I think we're going round and round.
Yes,
certainly. And I think that we want to be clear about where our boundaries lie in terms of what we can and cannot do and what we can and cannot dictate for families as well, in terms of what our expectations are. And I'm almost hearing that we're certainly in favor of allowing at Ashland High School and Ashland public schools athletics to continue based on Stephen's recommendations, the MIA recommendations from a health and wellness standpoint, and modifications made. But yet there's an expectation, and that's sort of the word I'm looking at, that our students, athletes, are not participating on competitive travel teams. And we can state the expectation, I agree. I mean, I don't know how we actually police that, to Stephen's point earlier, or if we have any purview to even mandate that with folks in the community. So it's sort of, you know, my head keeps going around just saying it's our expectation that student athletes are committing to the teams that we, or the sports that we're providing in the Ashland Public Schools, with the expectation that they're not on competitive travel teams throughout that season. You know, it's sort of,
Jim, I don't think we have any, purview of what people do outside of school on their free time, but I think where we do have a say in who we allow on our teams. So if,
no, I understand.
And I know it's hard to police that, but I think, at least for me, where the comfort is that number one, we're stating the expectation, and there's a certain amount of trust involved that people are going to follow it. But it also allows us, if we find out that it's not being followed, not that we're going to spend hours trying to track people down, but if it comes to light, as these things often do, then that student will no longer be welcome on our team, and we do have the purview to do that.
So, again, I'm just struggling with that too, Lori. I think I'm a hockey player, but yet I'm a competitive skier, and my club team skis competitively, and I'm not actually with anyone. I travel by myself to the event, and I'm going to downhill ski, do the slalom, and that's
right. I totally get that, but the whole reason why I'm being asked to support athletics is because not allowing it is so detrimental to students' mental health.
I understand, and I support that.
Activities are limited, but if in fact their activities are not limited, then I personally am less motivated to engage in activities that bring additional risk right now.
Yeah. So what do people think about this? I move that we approve the Ashland winter season with games starting no sooner than January 19th, 2021, with the expectation that student athletes that participate in Ashland athletics will not participate in other external competitive leagues or teams.
Well, can you read that again?
That we approved the Ashland winter season with games starting no sooner than January 19th, 2021, with the expectation that student athletes that participate in Ashland athletics will not participate in other external competitive leagues and teams. Or teams, but.
Yeah. Could you add to the end of it, with any exceptions to be reviewed by the superintendent and athletic director? Because I do think Jim's point is valid, and
no, that's not going to be my motion, because that's not the reason we're having this conversation. If that student is already participating in all these other things, we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Let's go through the process. All right, Paul, you made a motion. Yeah. Is there anybody who's willing to second it?
I will second it, yes.
And then let's take a vote. Mark Terry?
Lori, can we have further discussion on the motion before we vote?
Further discussion on the motion.
So I guess sorry, go ahead, Erin.
So the only reason for my adding that addendum to the end was that there are specific sports that are competing, but competing remotely. And so, for example, swim teams. There are private club swim teams that are competing, but the meets are held virtually. So it's competitive, but they're not ever seeing and physically contacting the other team. And that's why the language needs to be slightly different, because you could have somebody that, say, wants to play girls basketball, but it also is going to do swim team. And when you're saying competitive, yeah, it's competitive because they're swimming against their own time, but they're never in the pool or even in the same building as the other team. I don't know, Lori, you might know how gymnastics is handling meets. I think all the meets are virtual for gymnastics, So again, it's competitive, but it's not in the same facility. And with something like downhill skiing, I think there's a valid exception there. That was my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not into the exception piece, but as far as we can add other in-person external competitive leagues and teams, right? So that way, like I said, if somebody's doing a virtual swim where you're just doing timed things, and you're not, it's not this is all risk-based, right? So if it's virtual, it's not adding risk.
Right, if you put the word travel in there, then that takes care of that concern, I think.
Okay.
I guess my only further comment on this is it feels like in some ways we're going back to the sort of original question of whether this is safe or not. And, you know, for me, the idea of supporting athletics is based on the premise that while it's identified as a risky proposition by the state in terms of like they're leveling sports as more or less risk, if I felt like there was a substantial risk in this, I wouldn't be supporting athletics at all. And, you know, I think my view is that, you know, there've been these medical reviews done by the MIAA. Our local health folks are telling us they're supportive of it. And it feels like, you know, so then let's support it because we're deeming it to be safe. The reality is nothing is 100% safe right now, right? We know that there are kids who are hanging out with other kids, not respecting social boundaries, and it just question whether or not we're getting too far into the weeds of making our own judgments about what makes things more or less safe, to be honest with you. So I appreciate the motion and the way it's framed. I think where I'm going to come out on this is you know, supporting athletics as presented, but we've got kids doing all sorts of different things, and I think we may be just sort of picking on one thing that we can control, right? Or I think we can by, you know, saying you're not eligible to play if you're doing this other stuff, but I'm not sure if it makes things materially safer.
Well, so the way I appreciate your comments, the big difference is you're comparing what we're doing with what anyone else is doing, which they're not necessarily adhering to any modifications to any sports, right? So if you're saying, hey,
Paul.
What's that?
I'm not sure that's accurate. There are rules in place that govern all these other organizations as well. I mean, and I don't intimately know what they are, but I know that
but that's my point, is that we don't know if they were following the same set of rules, right? Then we can compare. But if they're not necessarily following the same set of rules, and I'm not saying that because they're not us, they're not doing it well. They could be doing it better than us, 100%, right? But there isn't the oversight that we can have any confidence that what this child is doing or what this child is doing isn't completely out of bounds. And we've had incidences that we know of where these other organizations have traveled and come back and had clusters of cases, right? Without getting into specifics, we know that that's occurred. Whether they follow what rules they followed, I can't say, right? But to me, there's no correlation if we don't have anything that's saying, hey, you know what? All these basketball teams, they're all following the same rules as us. Then that's a different conversation. But
yeah, I guess my point, Paul, was that it's not just about other athletics. I'm talking about activities, meaning human behaviors. Right? I mean, and I'm comparing it to what people are choosing to do or not do in terms of following social distancing, gathering for Christmas or Thanksgiving, or right. That there are all sorts of other things that are going on that are posing a risk. And you know, so I think what I'm concerned about, or my point is, if I'm able to articulate it well, is really that, you know, what we're talking about here is there, I suppose, theoretically, some improvement to the risk of involvement a student has because they're only participating in our basketball team and not another one, right? Not a second one. I think the answer, you can't make an argument that it's more risky to do that. I get that. But in the scheme of all the things that people are doing with their lives right now, I'm not sure that this is necessary. But that's my opinion. You know, I'm happy to take the vote, and I think I know where it's going anyway. But that was the point I was trying to make.
Well, you know, Mark, with the reason why all of this is so complex, I think, is I really can't disagree with anything that you've said. And it is true, we have zero control of what anybody's doing outside of this. So trying to manage one small piece of it, I'm not sure that it gives us any degree of confidence that it's going to make all that much of a difference. And I agree with all of that. And at the same time, feel that my whole reason for supporting athletics is to give students opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have because of how important it is balanced against the risk. So so that's kind of, it's just complex, and I understand all parts of it. And so I think you and I might be voting differently on this, but not because I disagree with anything that you've said. It just makes my vote to support athletics and feel good about it possible. So,
Lori,
Paul made the motion. Did anybody second it?
So Lori,
Yeah.
do we want to support the modification? I can reread it with the modification if you'd like.
Yes, why don't you reread it, please?
Sure. I move that we approve the Ashland winter season with games starting no sooner than January 19th, 2021, with the expectation that students that participate in Ashland athletics will not participate in other in-person external competitive leagues or teams.
Is there a second for that?
I will second it.
And then all in favor, Kathy?
Aye.
Mark?
No.
Aaron?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And then aye for me as well.
Mark, what
Or
was
if I
your?
can just ask that the record reflect that my vote was about the conditions as opposed to support for the athletics.
So noted.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else that we need to say today, Jim, before we adjourn?
No.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's the challenge of the situation that we find ourselves in here, right? There are no easy answers to any of this. And we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And we've all, you being the number one person here, Jim, but also Ed and Audrey and every one of us that's voting on these decisions. And all the administrators have taken on an enormous responsibility here that nobody asked for, and nobody completely understands because it's all unfolding right in front of us every day.
Yeah, I think Lori sums it up well. Listen, every decision we make comes at a cost to 50% of the population, comes at a benefit of 50%, right? I mean, it's sort of, I've resigned myself to the fact that no matter whatever decision you make as a board or I make as a leader of our district, it's wrong. So that's okay. But then there might be someone else who says, you know what, that's a good decision. And I think, again, the conversation was fruitful. It talks about our level of intensity to do what's right for kids. And I appreciate that. And whether we walk away from here and a memo goes out to the community that this is being allowed and here are the stipulations, there are going to be some who will be quite angry about it, and there'll be others who understand it. But unless you were here to hear the thoughtful dialogue for an hour plus, we spent more time on athletics than we did on going back to school on the hybrid remote, right? And that's quite typical of our culture. And I think we will do the best we can. Stephen will do the best he can with athletics and to provide our students with a really positive experience and one that is much needed for many of our kids. I think that is, in the end, what you said and what everyone else said. We value what purpose it has for our kids in terms of their social, emotional, and physical well-being. And I think that is critically important to walk away from hearing today, is that is really what you're voting on, at least in my mind. So there's nothing more from the COVID standpoint that I need to report today. We will make sure that within, Stephen, you and I need to connect, that the messaging about 14-day quarantines because of close contacts, that's the route we're taking based on our public health officials, and how we're treating it within our schools as well. Families need to understand that as well.
Thanks, Jim. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second.
And then all in favor? Mark?
Hi.
Erin?
Aye. And thank you, everybody, for your time today.
Paul?
Aye, and why we voted differently, Mark, I 100% echo what Lori said. I appreciate your thoughts and respect them greatly. So.
And Kathy?
Aye.
And an aye for me as well. Thank you, everybody, for always showing up for these difficult conversations. I wish you well, and I hope that the rest of the week goes smoothly for all of you.
Thank you.
And again, thanks administrators who are all on vacation. So appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.